If you follow the money, the end of the world has a specific GPS coordinate. It is not a bunker in South Dakota. It is not a mountain in Switzerland. It is a sheep farm in the Otago region of New Zealand. For the last decade, Silicon Valley billionaires and hedge fund managers have been quietly buying up massive tracts of land in the South Pacific. They call it Armageddon Insurance. The theory is simple. When the supply chains snap, when the grid goes dark, or when the missiles fly, New Zealand is the one place on Earth that just might be far enough away to survive. But is that actually true? Or is it just a very expensive fantasy? I am Tom, and today we are going to audit the apocalypse. We are running the numbers on New Zealand against everything from nuclear winter to zombie outbreaks. We are going to find out if this island nation is actually a fortress, or if it is just a beautiful trap waiting to close. Before we start mapping out fallout zones, I want to be clear about what we are looking for. A true doomsday haven needs more than just nice scenery. It needs energy independence, food surplus, political stability, and most importantly, it needs a moat. A really big moat. New Zealand seems to check all these boxes on paper, but paper burns. We need to look at the logistics of survival when global trade hits zero. If you enjoy deep dives into disaster logistics and realistic survival theory, do me a favour and hit that subscribe button right now. Consider it securing your spot in the bunker before the doors close. We break down a new survival scenario every week, and you do not want to be the one knocking when the air filtration system is already sealed. Alright, let us look at the geography, because in real estate and the apocalypse, location is everything. Let us look at the map. New Zealand is geographically isolated in a way that is hard to comprehend until you try to fly there. It is over 2,000 kilometres from Australia, its nearest neighbour, across the chaotic Tasman Sea. To the south, nothing but Antarctica. To the east, the vast empty Pacific. In a military context, or during a massive refugee crisis, this is the ultimate defence. An invading army needs a logistics chain, and maintaining a supply line across thousands of miles of open ocean is a nightmare, even for a superpower. If Europe or North America destabilises, there are no land bridges to New Zealand. There are no desperate masses walking across the border. The ocean is the wall that no politician has to build. It is just there, churning and cold. This isolation is the primary reason why tech moguls view it as a sanctuary. It buys you time. While the rest of the world is dealing with the immediate chaos of a collapse, New Zealand effectively has a buffer zone the size of an ocean. However, that same ocean is a double-edged sword. Isolation is safety, but isolation is also starvation if you are not prepared. New Zealand is a modern, developed economy. It relies heavily on imports for technology, medicine, and refined fuels. If the global shipping lanes stop, New Zealand is instantly cut off from the rest of the species. The country produces a massive surplus of food, so you will not starve calorically, but maintaining a modern standard of living becomes incredibly difficult. Think about pharmaceuticals. Think about spare parts for the renewable energy grid. Think about computer chips. None of that is made locally at scale. So while the geography protects you from invaders, it also traps you with whatever resources you have on hand the day the ships stop coming. The billionaire preppers know this, which is why they are not just buying land, they are trying to build self-sustaining ecosystems. But for the average person, that isolation means you are back to the 19th century a lot faster than you might think. Let us shift gears to a threat we are all too familiar with, a global pandemic. In this scenario, New Zealand is arguably the heavyweight champion of the world. We saw a preview of this during COVID-19. Because the country is an island nation with limited ports of entry, they can shut the door tighter and faster than almost anyone else. They have some of the strictest biosecurity laws on Earth, originally designed to protect their agriculture from pests. They treat invasive species with extreme prejudice. When you pivot that infrastructure to fighting a virus, it is incredibly effective. The ability to completely seal the border allows the internal population to potentially eradicate a pathogen and return to normal life, while the rest of the world is still burning. If the Doomsday scenario is a weaponized supervirus or a natural plague with a high mortality rate, being stuck on an island with a government willing to lock the ports is exactly where you want to be. But let us look at the fine print. New Zealand's strategy relies entirely on keeping the bug out. If the bug gets in, the math changes. Pre-pandemic assessments of New Zealand's health security were actually middling. They ranked about 54 out of 100 on the Global Health Security Index before 2020. The issue is surge capacity. There are not enough ICU beds or specialised medical personnel to handle a massive wave of mass casualties compared to larger nations. It is a small country with a small population. If a biological agent breaches that initial wall, the medical system can be overwhelmed very quickly. Additionally, we go back to the supply chain issue. New Zealand does not manufacture vaccines or advanced antivirals at a global scale. They would be at the end of the line for imports. So, for a pandemic, New Zealand is a high-risk, high-reward gamble. If the wall holds, you are in paradise. If the wall breaches, you are in a trap with limited hospital beds. Now, let us talk about the big one: nuclear war. This is the scenario that keeps the Cold War generation up at night, and it is making a comeback. In a full-scale nuclear exchange between the major powers, the Northern Hemisphere is effectively a no-go zone. The targets are in the US, Europe, Russia, and China. New Zealand is structurally irrelevant to a nuclear conflict. It has no nuclear weapons. It is a nuclear-free zone by legislation. It has no strategic missile silos or command centres that an enemy needs to wipe out. It is simply not worth the warhead. On top of that, atmospheric modelling suggests that the fallout patterns from a Northern Hemisphere war would largely stay in the north due to global wind patterns. The equator acts as a sort of atmospheric barrier. While radiation would eventually spread, New Zealand would see a fraction of the fallout compared to anywhere else. You would avoid the blast, the heat, and the worst of the immediate radiation. However, surviving the blast is the easy part. The hard part is the nuclear winter. If enough cities burn, the smoke blocks out the sun, global temperatures drop, and agriculture collapses. This is where New Zealand really shines. A study published in the journal Risk Analysis specifically looked at this. They found that even in a severe nuclear winter scenario, New Zealand is one of the few places that could still produce enough food to feed its population. The combination of proximity to the ocean, which moderates temperature, and the existing agricultural surplus is a lifesaver. New Zealand currently produces enough food for about 40 million people, but only has a population of 5 million. Even if yields drop by 80% due to lack of sunlight, they can still feed everyone. The menu might get boring, lots of dairy and lamb, not much else, but you would not starve. That is a claim very few countries can make. If the bombs drop, the Kiwi diet becomes the most valuable survival asset on the planet. What about the slow-motion apocalypse? Climate change and societal collapse. As the world warms, the equator becomes uninhabitable, and water becomes the new gold. New Zealand is incredibly well positioned here. It is an island nation with significant rainfall and massive aquifers. While Australia dries out and catches fire, New Zealand generally retains water security. The energy grid is another huge plus. It is heavily renewable, relying on hydro, geothermal, and wind. This means if the oil tankers stop arriving, the lights stay on in New Zealand. at least for a while. The South Island in particular has a low population density and high resource abundance. It is the type of place where communities can potentially pivot to local resilience relatively easily. The government is stable, corruption is low, and the social contract is strong. These are the soft skills of survival that people forget about. But here is the twist. While New Zealand might be safe from the climate of the future, it is very much in danger from the geology of the present. New Zealand sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire. It is geologically hyperactive. We are talking about massive earthquakes and volcanoes. The city of Auckland is built on top of a volcanic field. The Alpine Fault on the South Island is due for a major rupture. If you are fleeing a climate collapse or a war, you might just be trading one disaster for another. Imagine surviving the collapse of global civilization, only to have your refuge destroyed by a magnitude 8 earthquake. It is a very real risk. The native hazards of the land are significant. While the government has good building codes and earthquake readiness, a massive seismic event without international aid coming in, that is a civilization-ending event on a local scale. So, you are safe from the heat, but the ground beneath your feet is not exactly stable. Alright, let us get a little speculative. Let us talk about zombies. I know, but stay with me. The zombie scenario is actually a great proxy for any rapid biological collapse or civil unrest. And believe it or not, New Zealand takes this surprisingly seriously. The City of Wellington actually drafted an official zombie outbreak plan, largely as a training exercise, but it exists. The geographic advantages here are obvious. Zombies cannot swim across the Tasman Sea. If an outbreak starts in London or New York, New Zealand has a massive time buffer to lock down. Unlike a virus, which can travel invisibly on a plane, a zombie outbreak is loud. You can see it coming. New Zealand could theoretically seal its ports and airports and become a fortress of the living. Furthermore, the rural population is well armed by international standards, lots of hunting rifles, and accustomed to outdoor survival. The number 8 wire mentality of Kiwi ingenuity would go a long way in fortifying farms against the undead. However, there is a major weak point in the Kiwi zombie defence: urbanisation. New Zealand is not just hobbits in holes, it is highly urbanised. Auckland is a choke point. Some simulations suggest that because of Auckland's density and geography, it would be one of the fastest cities to fall if an infection actually started inside the borders. It is a narrow isthmus. There is nowhere to run. If you are trapped in Auckland during a rage virus scenario, you are in trouble. The winning move in a New Zealand zombie scenario is the offshore islands. Great Barrier Island, Stewart Island, places that are isolated from the isolation. If you can get there, and you have a fishing rod and a solar panel, you can probably wait out the entire apocalypse while the mainland sorts itself out. So, New Zealand is zombie resistant, but not zombie proof, especially if you love city life. What about the truly unknown? Alien invasion, or rogue AI, or grey goo nanobots? In these scenarios, geography starts to lose its meaning. If an advanced civilization has the technology to travel across light years of space, the Tasman Sea is not going to stop them. New Zealand offers no military defence against a superior technological force. In fact, being an isolated island might make it a convenient testing ground or a resource extraction point. The only advantage here is obscurity. If the invaders are targeting high-density population centres or nuclear stockpiles, New Zealand is low on the priority list. You might buy yourself a few weeks or months simply because you are not worth the ammo. But do not confuse obscurity with safety. In a War of the Worlds scenario, there is no bunker deep enough. This also applies to AI or cyber collapse. New Zealand is fully integrated into the global digital network. It is not an analogue sanctuary. If a rogue AI shuts down the global banking system or the power grids, New Zealand goes dark just like everyone else. However, the recovery might be faster. The proximity to food sources and the cultural history of resilience, specifically the Maori traditions of resource management and community support, provide a social fallback that hyper-individualistic societies might lack. In the face of an existential threat, the community is the survival unit, not the individual. New Zealand has strong community cohesion compared to many Western nations. That might be the only weapon that matters against an enemy you cannot shoot. Let us look back to the billionaires. There is a whole industry now of high-end survivalism in New Zealand. We are talking about subterranean luxury condos buried under the rolling hills of Queenstown. These people are betting everything on New Zealand. But there is a flaw in their plan. You cannot just parachute into a country during a collapse and expect the locals to welcome you with open arms. If the world is ending, private property laws might not mean much. A bunker is only as safe as your relationship with your neighbours. If you are a foreign billionaire hiding in a hole while the local town starves, that bunker is just a tomb with a nice wine cellar. The locals know the terrain. They know the water sources. They know each other. The fantasy of the lone wolf survivor in a high-tech fortress ignores the reality that New Zealand is a tight-knit society. The real strength of New Zealand is not the concrete you pour, but the people. The indigenous Maori population has retained knowledge of the land, food gathering and social organisation that predates modern civilization. This is Matauranga Māori, traditional knowledge. In a collapse scenario, this knowledge is worth more than gold. The iwi, or tribes, have organised responses to disasters that are incredibly effective. We saw this during recent cyclones and the pandemic. They mobilised faster than the central government in some cases. So if you are planning to ride out the apocalypse in New Zealand, your best asset isn't a stockpile of freeze-dried food. It is being a useful, trusted member of a community that knows how to live off the land. The billionaires might have the bunkers, but the locals have the skills. So, should you move there? Here is the cold water. Getting into New Zealand is hard. Getting into New Zealand during a crisis will be impossible. The government knows they are a lifeboat, and they are very selective about who gets a seat. Immigration requirements are strict. You need skills, money, and health. And if you are thinking, I'll just fly there when the news gets bad, think again. Aviation fuel runs out fast. Airspace closes faster. If you are not already on the ground when the event starts, you are not getting in. The ocean that protects New Zealand also isolates it. It is a long swim. This is why the plan of fleeing to New Zealand is flawed for 99% of people. Unless you have dual citizenship and a private jet fueled up on the runway right now, New Zealand is just a nice picture on a map. Even if you have the money, the government has tightened the rules on foreign land ownership precisely because of all these doomsday preppers. They do not want to become a parking lot for paranoid billionaires. They want citizens who contribute to the economy now, not just people looking for a bolt hole. The golden visa routes are expensive and getting harder to navigate. So, for the vast majority of us, New Zealand is a theoretical haven, not a practical one. It serves better as a model for what to look for in your own region: isolation, water, food security, and community. You might not be able to get to Queenstown, but you can try to replicate those conditions wherever you are. So, is New Zealand the doomsday haven? The answer is a qualified yes. For a nuclear winter, a pandemic, or a societal collapse, it is objectively one of the best places on Earth. It has the food, the water, the energy, and the moat. It can survive when the rest of the world stops working. But it is not magic. It has volcanoes, earthquakes, and a fragile supply chain for high-tech goods. And against truly exotic threats like aliens, it is just as vulnerable as anywhere else. The myth of New Zealand is powerful because it represents a reset button, a place where humanity could theoretically start over. But the reality is that survival is work. It is farming, it is community building, and it is dealing with the fact that you can never truly run away from the problems of the world. You can only buy yourself a little more time and a little more distance. I want to hear from you in the comments. If you had to pick one spot on Earth to ride out the end of the world, and you couldn't pick New Zealand, where would it be? Patagonia? Iceland? Or would you just fortify your own basement? Drop your coordinates in the comments below. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Keep your actual location operational security tight. If you enjoyed this deep dive, like the video and subscribe for more survival analysis. We have a breakdown of the best vehicles for a wasteland scenario coming up next, and you don't want to miss that. Until next time, stay safe, stay prepared, and keep your eyes on the horizon. Tom out.